Valley, welcome to the program. You call the results from these talks over the weekend as good as it could possibly get. Can you explain why?
Well, because both sides went to these talks in order to ascertain that there's actually a pathway to negotiations. And I think they came back believing that there is pathway to negotiations. That's why there's a second round scheduled for the coming weekend. And even the president's remarks that you just broadcast, yes, it does put pressure on Iran, but it also shows that he's not committed to this process. He believes it's going well. He just wants it to go faster. And he's again reiterating that he wants these talks to succeed because the alternative is not something that he doesn't want to contemplate, and Iran should not want either.
And despite hearing harsh condemnation about the JCPOA deal that was struck in 2015 and Trump campaigning over the years since that any deal would require Iran completely doing away with its nuclear programs as well as its missile programs and funding of its proxies, it appears now, at least from early reporting, that both sides, or the U.S. side, may seem content with just doing away with building a bomb, the capabilities of building a nuclear bomb. How does that differ ultimately from the original deal then that President Trump called the worst deal in the world?
Well, I think what you mentioned as a sort of a maximal set of asks of Iran is really not realistic, because you're basically asking a country to give up absolutely everything it has. And then, what is it going to get in return to justify that? It basically is a non-starter. It's really a recipe for going to war right away. So if you're going to have a credible diplomatic engagement, you have to basically agree to compromise in the middle. So Iran will be far away from a bomb, which is what the president is saying and he wants. And Iran in exchange will get sanctions relief to justify that. That does look like the 2015 new international deal. But perhaps the terms might be different. President Trump could claim victory if he says, well, certain aspects of the deal, certain terms are fundamentally different or are more stringent than they were in 2015. But in the end, any diplomatic deal is going to look like a version of the 2015 deal.
So in that sense, it may look very similar, but we know a lot has changed in the interim. Iran has become much closer to developing a nuclear weapon. It's enriched enough uranium close to weapons-grade quality to make at least 6 bombs, it has been reported. So even if there is a deal, how much oversight can there be at this point to make sure that Iran doesn't cross that threshold since they've come so much closer?
Well, Iran definitely has gained know-how and knowledge, and you cannot undo that. But the terms that we're talking about for a deal is exactly goes to these points. Would Iran agree to enrich below, let's say, 5% or even lower that was in the original deal? Would Iran give up all the enriched uranium that it has amassed over the past 4 or 5 years? Will it disassemble all this cascades of centrifuges that it has? And will it agree to intrusive inspections by the International Atomic Energy Agency that would provide guarantees that it's actually not experimenting and enriching? So once Iran agrees in principle to terms that the United States wants that would ensure that Iran is not close to nuclear weapons or the sufficient fuel for nuclear weapons, then the question would become, how does the United States guarantee that? And that's where the devil is in the detail of the negotiations.
You said something over the weekend, though, that caught my attention, and that may be that Trump, and as we know from previous deals, it's all about the headline and maybe not so much about the details. And he campaigned on, he began this administration by saying he was going to end the war in Ukraine quickly. He said that he was going to end the war in Gaza quickly, and that hasn't worked out. And now he seems focused on, I can get myself a deal here. At what point does it come across that perhaps the United States may be too eager to rush to a deal that may not actually result the way the president would like it to?
Well, we won't know until the talks go on for a bit. But I think where this is different is Iran is more eager to have a deal than, say, Israel or Hamas are, or Ukraine and Russia are. I mean, in those cases, the ones that actually have to make a deal were not really ready for a deal. And that's why those ceasefires have fallen apart. I think Iran has been weakened recently. Iran doesn't want war, and Iran does need economic relief. If Iran believes that Trump is willing to cut a deal and President Trump is willing to lift sanctions, I think there is sufficient incentive on part of Tehran to arrive at a deal. Now, that doesn't mean that they can actually agree on the terms. Things can fall apart on the details. But I think at this moment, both sides sized one another up in Oman, came away believing that both sides are interested in the process, are interested in getting to a deal. And that makes this, I think, more promising than the other two ceasefire agreements that you mentioned.
What does Iran have now? What are they capable of today?
Well, Iran is weakened in the region, but Iran has a significant amount of missile capability still. And Iran has a very advanced nuclear program that, yes, it can be bombed, but it cannot be destroyed from the air, and it can be rebuilt. And so just bombing Iran's nuclear facilities does not do away with its nuclear program. And that exactly is where Iran's leverage is. The United States can start a war with Iran, but it will not get to finish it. It will not have the say as to how Iran would react or whether Iran would go nuclear or not. And therefore, I think the Iranians understand that war is not in their advantage, but is also not in America's advantage either. And they have enough nuclear capability right now to hold America and Israel's attention. And that's what is bringing the United States to the diplomatic table.
And we know that Prime Minister Netanyahu said that he wants Iran to no longer be able to enrich uranium at all, essentially doing away with its nuclear program, not just a civilian program, as Iran now claims that it has and is focused on. What role does Israel play here? I know that Ron Dermer met with Steve Witkoff shortly, or spoke with Steve Witkoff shortly after these meetings in Oman. What added pressure is Israel putting on the United States here to do more than just sort of the headlines that are coming out of these talks?
I think Israel's preference was actually that President Trump would not negotiate at all and would actually proceed to bombing Iran's nuclear sites. Israel's argument was that Israel had taken out Iran's missile defenses, that its various nuclear sites were vulnerable, and the United States should just finish them off and not talk about them. And then Plan B was to ask the administration to demand that Iran dismantle its nuclear program in its entirety. It was very obvious from the meeting President Trump had with Prime Minister Netanyahu in Washington that President Trump did not want to bomb Iran's nuclear program right now, nor did he want to ask something at the table which would be a non-starter, namely you have to give up everything right now. And I think Iranians got assurances from Steve Witkoff in Oman that the United States is not interested in right now in dismantlement of the entirety of Iran's program, but to negotiate Iran away from being on the threshold of having nuclear weapons. And that's the space in which Iranians believe they can negotiate. So I think Israel, for now, is not getting its way with the Trump administration.
Yeah, and Trump may be using Israel, and there's some speculation that if this deal doesn't go according to plan, that Israel may still want to go after their facilities and program on their own, that Trump could view that as leverage for Iran actually signing a deal now as well. Vali Nasser, thank you so much for the time. Appreciate you breaking this down for us.
Thank you.